She begged for death, but death sent her something worse, someone who refused to let her die. The auction block smelled of wet stone and copper. Rain fell against the Gothic arches of the underground market, each drop echoing through vaults that had swallowed screams for 3 centuries. Alara Thorne stood motionless at the edge of the platform, her bare feet finding no purchase on the slick marble. The blindness came first, the fever that took her sight 8 years ago when she was still beautiful enough to matter. Now, at 32, she was merely inventory. The auctioneer's voice was a hammer against bone. Lot 17, female, literate, skilled in languages, French, Italian, Latin, blind from birth complications, docile, excellent for particular services. Particular services. The euphemism hung in the stale air like incense at a funeral. She had been sold 3 times before. The first was her own father, a merchant who couldn't afford another mouth when the blindness made her unmarriageable. The second was a nobleman who kept her in a tower room, using her voice like an instrument, making her read poetry to his guests, while they drank wine that stained the air with the smell of fermented grapes and decay. The third was worse. She didn't think of the third. Now there was only the block, the rain, and the sound of coins exchanging hands like prayers to a god that didn't answer. A figure moved through the crowd. She didn't see him, she saw nothing anymore, but she felt him. The temperature dropped 12 degrees. The rain stopped falling on the marble. Even the auctioneer's voice fractured mid-syllable, as if his lungs had forgotten their purpose. "The lot is withdrawn," a voice said. It was not loud, but it unmade the world. Alara felt hands, cold, precise, imperial, fasten a cloak around her shoulders. Velvet, lined with something that felt like fur from an animal that no longer existed. She smelled smoke and earth and something ancient, like tombs opened after centuries of silence. "Who?" she began, but his hand found her face, not violent, reverent. His fingers traced the white scar that ran from her left temple to her cheekbone, the mark from the fever that stole her sight. "The mark of sight," he whispered, "not lost, transformed." She tried to pull away, but there was nowhere to go. His presence was a gravity well. Everything else, the auction house, the rain, the other people, suddenly seemed to exist in a different dimension. "I am Nathaniel," he said, "and you are coming home." He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, as if she had already begun to disappear. The last thing she heard before the darkness deepened into something else entirely was the sound of wings. Or perhaps it was only the rain starting again, falling upward instead of down. The sound of every dead thing remembering how to live. The castle had no windows, or perhaps it had too many. Alara couldn't tell the difference anymore. 3 days had passed since Nathaniel brought her to this place of stone and silence. 3 days of corridors that seemed to shift when she walked them, hallways that smelled of different centuries. One corridor tasted like the Renaissance, wine and candle wax and the sweat of artists. Another carried the scent of a battlefield from some war she would never know the name of. The walls wept in that one. She heard the moisture sliding down stone like tears that refused to dry. He left her in a room, her room he called it, where fire burned but cast no warmth, where a bed existed but she had not slept. In 3 days she had not slept. "You can rest," Nathaniel said when he came to her on the 3rd evening. She heard him before she sensed him. The soft cadence of his footsteps was learning her language, becoming less alien. The hunger passes, the thirst becomes manageable. What hunger? Alara's voice had become strange to her, thin as gossamer. What thirst? He was silent for a long moment. She heard him breathe, not a living man's breath, but something ceremonial, as if he was remembering what breathing meant. "Your blood carries a resonance," he said finally, "an echo of something sacred. When I touched your scar, do you understand what you are? A blind woman, merchandise, A conduit. His voice moved closer. She didn't flinch. Flinching required the expectation of pain, and she had learned long ago that pain was negotiable. Your blindness is not an absence of sight. It is an amplification of it. You see differently. You see the truth underneath the world. Ilara laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I see nothing. Precisely. He took her hand. His touch was like holding winter in the shape of a man. That is why you were marked for the auction. That is why the noble families would have paid fortunes to own you. Not to use you, Ilara. To drain you. To drink what you carry and steal your sight for themselves. To see what you see. She pulled her hand away, but he held it gently, inexorably. I was going to refuse, he continued, and there was something like grief in his voice. The grief of an immortal who had learned to carry weight across centuries. I have spent 417 years refusing to feed on the marked ones, refusing to become the monster that made me. But when I touched your scar, I understood. You weren't marked for consumption. You were marked for salvation. Salvation from what? From dying alone in darkness, he said, and from the knowledge that the darkness was your only home. He left her then, and she sat in the firelight that cast no warmth, understanding that she had been bought, not saved. There was a difference, perhaps, but she could not see it. On the seventh night, Nathaniel brought her to the mirror. It was obsidian. Or perhaps it was glass so ancient it had forgotten how to reflect anything but lies. Ilara had not seen her own face in 8 years. She did not want to start now. Look, he commanded, and it was the first time his voice had held that particular timbre, not a request, but a decree that the universe itself would obey. She turned away. His hands found her shoulders, not violently, but with the certainty of someone who understands that some mercies require force. He turned her toward the mirror. Look, he repeated. Ilara opened her eyes, the reflex of a body that still believed sight was possible, and saw nothing. The mirror reflected nothing. No face, no scar, no woman standing in a room of a castle that didn't exist. What do you see? Nathaniel asked. Darkness. No, he said softly. You see the first truth. The mirror shows you what is beneath the skin, and beneath your skin, Ilara, there is light. She wanted to tell him he was mad, that the hunger and thirst he spoke of, the transformation that was happening to her blood, was simply death wearing a prettier name. But she couldn't, because with each passing night, she was beginning to understand. The auction block had been a mercy compared to this, not because it was pain, though her skin felt like it was burning from the inside, as if something molten was learning to live in her veins, but because the auction block had offered an ending. Here, in this castle of impossible corridors and mirrors that reflected truth instead of images, there was no ending. There was only the eternal choice to continue. What are you going to do to me? She asked. What you ask me to do, Nathaniel said. I can end this now. Let you walk into the sunrise as a human woman, with whatever years remain to you. You will leave here, and you will forget me, and you will die as all humans die, alone, afraid, in the dark. He paused. The silence had weight. Or, he continued, you can choose what I chose 417 years ago. You can choose to see forever, to understand that blindness is not the absence of sight, but the presence of something deeper. You can choose eternity, knowing that eternity is loneliness, knowing that everything you love will die and you will remain, knowing that you will remember every face, every voice, every moment of every death, and you will carry it all inside you until the sun burns out. Ilara's fingers found the scar on her face, the mark the fever had left, the mark that made her worth buying and worth saving. "If I choose," she whispered, "will I still be blind?" "No," Nathaniel said. "You will see everything, the dead, the living, the light that exists between moments. You will see the world as it truly is, broken, beautiful, and drowning in grace. And you will never be able to unsee it." She nodded slowly, understanding that this was not a choice at all. It was a surrender to something she had been surrendering to since the moment he touched her face in the auction house. "Then I choose," she said. He raised her wrist to his mouth. She felt his teeth, not violent, but precise, surgical, reverent. The pain was a door opening. The hunger that followed was the answer to every prayer she had ever stopped bothering to make. And the world, finally, began to come into focus. The transformation took 9 nights. Each night she shed something. Her need for breath, her fear of mirrors, her memory of the sun. By the 4th night, she had stopped trying to hold on to her humanity like a rope fraying at the edges. It was easier to let it go, to feel it dissolve into the hunger that had become her language. Nathaniel taught her nothing. Instead, he simply was, and she learned by proximity, the way prey learns the predator's patterns. On the 9th night, when she woke in the obsidian mirror and finally saw her own face, pale as moonlight, her scar now glowing faintly silver like a map written in a language only immortals could read, she understood something that broke what remained of her human heart. She remembered. Not the fever, not the blindness, not the auctions or the towers or the third thing she hadn't let herself think of. She remembered something else entirely. She remembered Nathaniel. Not from the auction house, from centuries before. She was standing in a garden in Constantinople, 1453, watching the Ottoman army breach the walls. There was a man beside her. This man, younger, but identical, his eyes holding the same terrible knowledge. He was weeping. He had just become what he was. And he was weeping because he understood that he would have to watch everything he loved burn, and he would remember all of it. She had reached for his hand. She had told him something. What? The memory fractured like old glass. "You remember," Nathaniel said. It was not a question. "I remember you," Alara whispered. "I remember choosing to die rather than watch you be alone. I remember the poison. I remember—" She stopped. The memory was too bright. It would burn her if she held it too long. "You don't remember choosing to die," Nathaniel corrected gently. "You remember choosing to join me instead. You drank my blood willingly as I drank yours, and when the conversion was complete, your mind could not hold the weight of 4 centuries of isolation compressing into a single moment. So you forgot. So your consciousness shattered into smaller pieces, and you lived 700 lifetimes in the spaces between heartbeats." Alara looked at her hands in the mirror. They were not her hands, or rather, they were her hands multiplied across time, every life she had lived, every death she had died, every moment she had forgotten and was now, finally, remembering. "Why did you let me forget?" she asked. "Because," Nathaniel said, stepping into the mirror beside her, and his reflection was perfect, unblemished, eternal. Mercy is not always about remembering. Sometimes it is about the grace of forgetting. I let you die and be reborn as new women, in new cities, across new centuries. I let you forget me so that you could have the mercy of choosing me again, over and over, so that your love was never obligation. It was always, always choice." Tears ran down her face, red tears because her blood had become precious, even in its sorrow. "I don't know who I am anymore," she said. "You are Ilara," Nathaniel whispered, "and you are every woman I have loved and lost and found again. And you are the scar on reality itself, the mark that proves love can survive anything, even eternity. You are the price I pay for my immortality, and I would pay it again. I will pay it again in every lifetime we have left." He kissed her forehead, and where his lips touched, the silver of her scar spread like cracks in glass, like light breaking through a world that had learned to love its own darkness. The blood stopped tasting like life and started tasting like memory. By the second month of her transformation, Alara understood that feeding was not about survival. It was about inheritance. Every life she took, carefully, never wastefully, Nathaniel's ancient codes written into her very cells, brought her someone else's history. A merchant from Prague carried the memory of his wife's laughter. A soldier from Moscow held the echo of a battlefield prayer. A philosopher from Vienna left behind the taste of every question he had never answered. She was becoming a library of the dead. "Is this always what it is?" she asked Nathaniel one dawn, as they rested in the deepest chamber of the castle, where stone had never seen light. "For us, yes," he said. "For the others of our kind, it is different. They feed to survive, to maintain the illusion of being alive. But you—" He took her hand. The gesture was becoming more familiar, less strange. "You feed to remember. You are collecting the lives of humanity. You are keeping their stories alive inside you." "That sounds like a curse." "All gifts are curses," Nathaniel said. "All curses are gifts. The question is only whether you have the strength to carry both simultaneously." On the 50th night, the hunters came. They were not human. Alara could smell the other in them, the ancient wrongness. They were what Nathaniel's enemies called the collectors, immortals who had learned to drain not just blood, but the essence itself, leaving behind empty vessels that looked human, but held nothing inside. They had been hunting Nathaniel for 2 centuries. Now they had found him. The battle was not loud or violent in the way Alara had imagined violence could be. It was silent. It was conceptual. It was 4 immortals locked in combat across dimensions she could barely perceive, each one trying to unmake the others by denying they had ever existed at all. Nathaniel fell first, not dead, but diminished, his presence flickering like a candle in wind. Alara felt the hunger transform into something else, something older than blood, something that remembered Constantinople and the moment she chose to fall into darkness rather than watch him burn alone. She moved without thinking. She moved with the weight of every life she had consumed, every memory she had inherited. She became a conduit for centuries, for all the women she had been, for all the choices she had made across reincarnations she could finally remember. The collectors fled, not defeated, simply unable to sustain existence in the presence of something that had loved too hard, for too long, across too many lifetimes, to be unmade by anything as simple as immortal hunger. When silence returned, Nathaniel was bleeding light from his wounds. "You remembered," he whispered, wonder in his voice. "I remembered who I am," Alara said, kneeling beside him. "I am the woman who chooses you. Every time, every lifetime. That is the only thing that matters." She fed him her blood, an inversion of everything they had been to each other. And as he drank, she felt herself becoming lighter, as if she was finally being allowed to rest. The castle changed after the battle. It became less a place and more a refuge for every broken thing that could not exist in the human world. The hallways filled with other immortals, not as enemies, but as exiles, those who had chosen differently, those who had loved and lost, those who had learned that eternity was only bearable if you were not alone in it. Alara moved through these new corridors, understanding that Nathaniel had been keeping this vigil alone for centuries, a sanctuary for the damned, a kingdom built from the rubble of everyone he had failed to save. She began to feed differently, not on the dying, but on the willing. Those who came to this castle to forget the weight of living forever. She took their pain, their memories, their despair, and she transmuted it into something that could be carried. She became less a predator and more a priestess, "You're healing him," said Miriam, an immortal woman who had lived through the fall of Rome. "Do you understand? In 4 centuries, Nathaniel has carried the weight of every life he's ever taken, every death he couldn't prevent. You're teaching him that there might be another way to survive." "There is no other way to survive," Alara said quietly. "There is only the choice to transform the way we carry the burden." On the 80th night, Nathaniel stood before her in the great hall of the castle, and for the first time since his transformation, he was not weeping. "I want to make you a promise," he said. Alara felt the old fear rise, the instinct to refuse, to protect herself, to believe that promises were only ropes waiting to strangle her. "I cannot promise you happiness," he continued. "I cannot promise you that the hunger will fade, or that the memories will stop weighing on you, or that we will not watch the world burn 1,000 times before the sun finally gives out. But I can promise you this: I will never let you face that darkness alone. I will never let you believe that your love is a burden rather than a redemption. And I will spend every century we have left understanding that loving you is the only immortality that matters." She moved to him then, across the distance that once would have felt like centuries, now crossed in a single breath. "That is enough," she whispered. "That has always been enough." He kissed her forehead, where the scar that marked her was now glowing so brightly that it cast shadows. And in those shadows she could see the future, not one, but thousands, an infinity of choices, an eternity of choosing him again and again across every possible lifetime. If you believe love can resurrect even the broken, subscribe and step into eternity. The 16th century came to the castle wearing rain. Alara stood at the highest tower, or what passed for the highest point, in a place that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions, and felt the weight of 200 years settling into her bones like snow, 200 years since her transformation, 200 years of watching empires rise and watching them crumble like ash, 200 years of Nathaniel's love, unchanging and absolute, like a star that refused to go supernova. The rain fell in patterns that seemed intentional, deliberate, as if the sky itself was trying to communicate something ancient. Each drop carried the memory of oceans that no longer existed, of civilizations drowned in their own ambition. Alara could taste them on her tongue. Salt and copper and the faint sweetness of things that had forgotten they were ever alive. Below the tower, the castle sprawled like a sleeping god. Its corridors had multiplied across the centuries, corridors that existed in spaces between heartbeats, hallways that smelled of different eras simultaneously. The great hall now held refugees from every age, immortals who had found sanctuary here, who had learned that existing forever did not require existing alone. There was a library where Miriam catalogued every life taken, every memory inherited, transforming violence into knowledge. There were gardens where things that should not grow flourished, flowers with petals of moonlight, trees that bore fruit tasting of ancient wine and forgotten prayers. And there was the chamber where Nathaniel slept, because even immortals needed to forget sometimes, and sleep was the only mercy that still worked. "We're running out of time," Miriam said, climbing the stairs behind her. The Roman had learned to move quietly, even in the presence of eternity. Her voice carried the weight of 20 centuries. She had watched the fall of Rome itself, had fed on senators and slaves alike before learning to choose differently. "The collectors have gathered allies, 17 of them now. They've crossed the continent. They've made pacts with things that predate our kind, demons that don't hunger for blood, but for essence, for the very concept of existence." Alara turned slowly. Miriam was carrying a leather journal, its pages stained with ink that moved of its own accord, recording events as they happened across the world. "And the humans?" Alara asked. "The humans are afraid," Miriam continued, climbing the final steps to join her at the tower's edge. "They're building something, instruments made of silver and mirrors, and words written in languages that hurt to hear. They're calling it science, but it's really just a new kind of hunting. They want to dissect what you've become. They want to understand how a creature of darkness can carry so much light. They want to weaponize it. Below them, the rain intensified. Lightning split the sky into geometric patterns, and in those patterns, Alara could read the mathematics of apocalypse. The world was accelerating toward something. The old ways of existing were becoming obsolete. The barriers between the natural and the supernatural were thinning like worn silk. "What is different now?" Alara asked, though she already knew. She had always known. The knowing had been growing inside her like a flower blooming in reverse, petals collapsing inward until they disappeared. "What is different is you," Miriam said gently. She moved to stand beside Alara at the tower's edge, their shadows merging on the stone below. 200 years ago, you were a vampire. Exquisite, yes. Powerful, certainly. But still comprehensible. Still operating within the laws we understand. Hunger, predation, survival. But now you are becoming something the world has never seen before. A creature of darkness that does not feed on death, but on redemption. A vampire who takes pain and transforms it into grace. You are rewriting the rules of what we are, and the universe is not equipped to handle it. Alara felt the hunger rise, not for blood, but for understanding. She turned to Miriam and saw the layers of her, the way a being accumulates across centuries. She saw the young Roman woman who had first chosen to join the darkness voluntarily, seeking power. She saw the slave she had been before that, whipped and broken. She saw the priestess of Diana she had been before slavery. And she saw, deeper still, the immortal soul, ageless, genderless, purely conscious, that had inhabited all these forms. "The collectors want to unmake you," Miriam continued, and now her voice was trembling slightly. "They believe you represent the death of their kind. If mercy becomes possible, if love can genuinely redeem even the monsters we've become, then their entire philosophy collapses. They have spent centuries justifying their hunger by insisting we are beyond salvation. You are living proof that they are wrong. And Nathaniel—" She paused. The silence had weight. It had texture. It fell between them like a blade. "Nathaniel is afraid," Miriam finished. "He is afraid he will lose you again, not to death, but to something worse, to ascension. To becoming something so bright that you burn away entirely, leaving him behind in the darkness where he spent so long learning to live. After 417 years of carrying his solitude, of building this castle from his sorrow, of learning to love you across multiple lifetimes and multiple deaths and multiple rebirths. He cannot imagine a universe where you are no longer confined to this form, this proximity, this shared existence." Alara fed on Miriam's fear then, not violently, but intimately, the way one drinks wine that has been blessed by time. She absorbed the Roman woman's anxiety, her ancient knowledge, her 2,000 years of accumulated wisdom about how love and loss were really the same thing viewed from different angles. And as the memories flowed through her, she understood what Miriam was trying to tell her without speaking it aloud. The scar on her forehead was not a mark. It was a doorway, and it was opening. Alara looked down at her hands. They were beginning to translate, not quite visible, not quite invisible. She could see through them to the stone beneath, and through the stone to the earth beneath that, and through the earth to the vast machinery of the world, turning slowly toward its inevitable ending. She could see the moment she had touched the mirror in the auction house, and she could see the moment, still approaching, when she would touch it again for the final time. "How long do I have?" she asked Miriam. The Roman woman did not answer immediately. She was consulting her journal, her eyes moving across pages that recorded not just events, but the fabric of causality itself. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible above the rain. 3 nights, she said. The transformation is exponential now. The light is consuming you from within, but it's not destruction, it's translation. It's you becoming something that exists in more dimensions than three, something that can see and be seen across all possible states of reality simultaneously. Nathaniel will not understand, Alara whispered. No, Miriam agreed. He will not understand, and that will be your gift to him. The greatest gift anyone can give the immortal is the knowledge that some mysteries will never be solved, some love will never be fully comprehended, some choices will never make logical sense but must be made anyway. The light from the scar on Alara's forehead flickered, once, twice, like a candle learning to breathe, and in that flickering, Miriam saw it. The outline of something vast and terrible and beautiful, the shape of redemption itself, beginning to take form. I need to tell him, Alara said. Yes, Miriam replied. But first, you need to understand what you're becoming. Come with me. There's something in the castle you've never seen. Something Nathaniel has kept hidden for centuries. Something he's been saving for exactly this moment. They descended from the tower together, moving through corridors that seemed longer than they should be, through passages that smelled of every age that had ever existed. Behind them, the rain continued to fall upward, the sky continued to rewrite itself, and the scar on Alara's forehead continued to glow brighter, burning holes in the fabric of the world. In the depths of the castle, in a chamber that had never before been open to anyone but Nathaniel himself, Miriam brought Alara to a wall of pure light. It was not a doorway or a window. It was simply a place where reality had worn thin, where the boundary between dimensions had become permeable. And visible through it, in shadowy silhouette, were thousands of faces, millions perhaps. Every soul Nathaniel had ever loved and lost, every being he had failed to save across his 4 centuries of existence, every ghost that haunted his immortality. This is what he's been saving you for, Miriam whispered. Not as a cure for his loneliness, but as the answer to his guilt. He needed to know that love could transcend loss, that one person, loved across multiple lifetimes, could become a doorway for all the others, that through you he could finally forgive himself for all the ones he couldn't save. Alara felt the weight of it then, not crushing, but grounding, the knowledge that she was not just becoming something for herself, but something for all of them, a bridge, a prayer answered, a promise kept across impossible eternities. The scar on her forehead blazed like a second sun. The ending began with silence. Nathaniel found her in the obsidian mirror, the same mirror where she had stood on the night of her transformation, the same mirror that had reflected nothing but truth. But now there were thousands of versions of her superimposed across the glass, a palimpsest of every woman she had been, every life she had lived, every lifetime she had chosen to remain. She was fading, not dying in the traditional sense, but translating, her form becoming increasingly ethereal, increasingly composed of light rather than matter. Her skin had begun to shimmer like oil on water, showing iridescent colors that didn't have names in any human language. Her eyes had become doors themselves, windows into dimensions that shouldn't be visible, but suddenly were. Nathaniel stood in the doorway for a long moment, unable to move. In 417 years, he had learned to be brave. He had learned to face hunger and death and the slow accumulation of witnessing everything he loved turn to dust. But this was something he had no framework for. This was losing someone not to death, but to transcendence. "I'm dying," Alara said. Her voice had changed. It carried echoes now, harmonics that suggested she was speaking from multiple places simultaneously. Or perhaps I should say, this form of me is dying. The me that was human and then vampire and then something trying to be both. That version of Alara is beginning to dissolve. Nathaniel tried to speak, but his voice fractured. He had spoken across centuries without hesitation, but now the words felt like breaking glass in his throat. "Don't," he finally managed. "Don't say this." "I have to say it," Alara continued. She did not turn to face him directly. She couldn't. not while transitioning between states of being. Instead, her reflection in the mirror turned, and it was like watching someone view you from the other side of eternity. The scar was never a wound, Nathaniel. It was a seeding. When I was born in that hospital room, when the fever took my human sight, the universe was already preparing me for this. The scar was always meant to open, and now it's opening. Nathaniel moved toward the mirror. He reached out, and his hand passed through the glass as if it had become nothing but water. He felt her there, not in the mirror, but behind it, in the space beyond. She was still warm. She still carried the scent of earth and smoke and ancient stone. But she was also becoming something else, something luminous, something that was beginning to exist in more states than one. "Tell me what's happening," he whispered. Ilara turned to face him fully now. Behind her in the mirror, the thousands of versions of herself began to separate, to peel away from each other like layers of an onion. But instead of revealing emptiness, each layer revealed something new. Each layer was a different aspect of her nature, a different frequency of her soul, a different possibility of who she could become. The hunger, the blood, the memories I've consumed across 200 years. They were all a transformation, she said. I was never meant to be a vampire in the traditional sense, Nathaniel. I was never meant to simply survive on predation and hide from the sun. I was meant to be a crucible, a place where darkness and light could meet without destroying each other. She held up her hands, and they were becoming translucent. He could see through them to the mechanisms of the universe, the threads of causality, the mathematics of grace, the way every thought and feeling was really just pattern and frequency looking at itself in a mirror. Every life I took, I transformed, she continued. Every person I fed on, their memories didn't die inside me. They illuminated me. They turned me into something that was part vampire, but also part human testimony, part dark, but also part light. And now all that light is trying to escape. All those transformed memories want to become something beyond just existing in a single body. Nathaniel felt tears on his face, real tears. Salt water produced by glands he'd forgotten were capable of such things. He had not truly wept since his own transformation, had learned instead to hold sorrow so tightly it crystallized into something resembling strength. "I don't want to lose you," he said. The words seemed inadequate, so he said them again. "I don't want to lose you. I have already lost you once, in Constantinople, when you chose to fall into darkness with me. I have already carried the weight of that loss across 4 centuries. I have already built this entire castle from the architecture of my loneliness. Please don't ask me to lose you again." Ilara stepped through the mirror. The glass did not break, but became something else. A veil rather than a barrier, a membrane rather than a wall. She stepped into the physical space where he stood, and when she touched him, he felt it like being struck by lightning that heals rather than burns. "I'm not leaving," she said. Her voice now carried that harmonic quality fully. She sounded like herself, and also like all the women she had ever been, all the versions of her that existed across time and space. "I'm not leaving, Nathaniel. I'm changing. The scar is becoming a gateway. That's what all this light means. That's what all the hunger and transformation has been leading toward." She took his hand, and he could see through her palm to the machinery of her new nature. She was becoming a doorway. She was becoming a choice. "Every person who carries pain so deep they think it will never heal," Ilara continued. "Every immortal who believes they're damned beyond redemption, every soul that has convinced itself love is a lie, they'll be able to find me through this mark. They'll be able to see that transformation is possible, that even the broken can choose grace, that even monsters can become light." "You're becoming a god," Nathaniel whispered. He said it not with fear, but with understanding. He had always known she was something more than vampire, something more than human. He had always sensed it in the way she moved, the way she loved, the way she could take the darkest suffering and transmute it into wisdom. "I'm becoming a choice," Ilara corrected. She was fading now, becoming almost entirely translucent. He could see the castle through her body, could see through the castle to the world beyond, could see through the world to the vast consciousness of existence itself, looking at itself. That's all salvation ever was. A choice. A moment when you decide that you're worth saving, and that the love of someone who sees your darkness and chooses to stay is enough to make that choice real. The light from her scar spread across the castle like dawn breaking after 1,000 years of night. It flowed through corridors, illuminating every shadow, every corner where sorrow had been allowed to accumulate. The obsidian mirror cracked, not shattering violently, but blooming like a flower opening its petals to the sun. Each crack became a doorway, each doorway became a passage. And through those passages, they began to come. The first was a woman in rags, her face scarred from burns, her eyes hollow with suffering. Behind her came a man carrying the weight of centuries, his hands stained with blood he had spilled in rage. Behind him came children who had died too young, soldiers who had forgotten how to be human, lovers who had lost the ones they cherished. They came singly and in groups, emerged from the cracks in reality, drawn by the light that Ilara was becoming. Nathaniel watched as his beloved transformed into something beyond human, beyond vampire, beyond anything he had language for. She was becoming the legend that would save the ones who came after. The proof that even monsters could choose grace, the gateway through which all the broken things of the world could begin to heal. "Will I see you again?" Nathaniel asked. His voice was small now, almost childlike, stripped of the authority and power he had accumulated across centuries. Ilara smiled, and her smile held every lifetime they had shared, every moment of choosing each other across centuries that refused to end. In that smile, he could see Constantinople burning and being rebuilt. He could see every room they had ever shared, every conversation about eternity and love and the weight of existing forever. He could see all the versions of her he had loved and loved again, compressed into a single moment of perfect understanding. "You'll see me," she said. Her voice was becoming something else now, not sound, but direct transmission of meaning into the consciousness of everyone who heard it. "You'll see me every time you choose to love instead of hunger. Every time you teach another broken immortal that redemption is possible. Every time someone looks into the darkness and finds not death, but a doorway." Behind her, the light was intensifying. It was becoming too bright to look at directly, but Nathaniel found he couldn't look away. He was watching her dissolve into pure consciousness, pure grace, pure redemption made manifest. She was becoming the bridge between the human world and whatever came after. She was becoming the proof that love was worth all the suffering it cost. "Don't forget me," he whispered. "I could never forget you." Ilara replied, "You are written into every frequency of my being now. You are the gravity that keeps me anchored even as I scatter across infinity. You are the reason I chose to remember in the first place, so that I could choose to stay again and again across every possible lifetime." The light consumed her, not violently, but gently, like coming home after 1,000 years of exile. She became luminescence. She became prayer. She became the space between moments, the place where time goes to rest. And Nathaniel, standing alone in a castle that was no longer a tomb, but a sanctuary, finally understood what it meant to love something so much that you had to let it become infinite. He raised his hand to the mirror, to the place where she had been, and felt the warmth of her light against his eternal skin. It didn't burn, it healed. It reminded him of what he had forgotten, that immortality was not a curse. It was an opportunity to love something so thoroughly that even when it transcended form, when it became something beyond comprehension, the love remained, unchanged, undiminished, eternal. Through the cracks in the mirror, through the doorways opening across the castle, through every passage and corridor and hidden chamber, he watched as the broken and the damned began to find their way to her light. They came seeking redemption, seeking proof that monsters could change, seeking the one thing that 417 years had taught him was the only thing that mattered, a reason to believe they were worth saving. He turned to Miriam, who was standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her face in a way they hadn't since the fall of Rome. "I will wait," he said to her, to the empty air, to the reflection of his own broken face in the shattered mirror. "I will teach them what she taught me, that we are not damned, that love is not mercy, it is transformation, that we are worthy of choosing and being chosen again and again across every lifetime until the sun burns out and darkness learns to forgive itself." Miriam nodded. She understood. She had spent 2,000 years learning the same lesson through different languages and different centuries. And now, watching Alara become the gateway, she understood that this was what all of eternity had been waiting for. This moment, this choice, this final proof that grace was not something bestowed from above. It was something that had to be chosen, moment by moment, lifetime by lifetime, by beings brave enough to love, despite knowing the cost. The rain began to fall, but it fell upward this time, ascending into a sky that had learned at last to hope. The rain carried memories with it. It carried every tear shed for lost loves, every drop of blood spilled in anger, every moment of suffering that had finally found a way to transform into meaning. In the cracks of the obsidian mirror, in the spaces between moments, in the hunger that would never quite fade, Nathaniel felt her presence. She was there, in the quality of the light, in the way the shadows had begun to contain their own luminescence, in the way the world itself seemed to have learned to breathe with a rhythm that felt like gratitude. She was becoming the legend. She was becoming the salvation that every broken immortal would one day find, and he would spend eternity teaching them her name, like if you believe even monsters deserve a second chance. Comment eternal if you'd trade your soul for love that heals. Follow for more immortal confessions born from blood and mercy.